Hey guys, my name is John Park and welcome to another tutorial series. Hey guys, so I just want to show you guys kind of the process of creating textures when I'm using the pattern stamp tool. So what the pattern stamp tool is basically, it's underneath the clone stamp, and all you do is you hold it down and it will actually come with very default settings here. And you'll notice I'll actually choose a brush here, and as you paint you will see that it emulates, or it paints literally what's in this sampling right here. And now there's different modes. You can actually align the textures so that whatever you paint, it will basically be revealing basically what the textures are doing. Or you can put it on impressionist mode and it'll sample the colors and it'll give you kind of this craziness, right? So this is something that I use, and what I like to do is I always like to use my own textures. I'm going to bring up a little set here so you guys can see. And I like to import textures that I found, either things online that's ambiguous enough, or things that I've made or I've scanned in. And I like using various textures for various reasons because it gives you so much variety of shapes, color, and just grittiness. So this is something that I love to have you guys just try out. And I like to just create a bunch of textures in here and just kind of bring them in. And some of it can be really low res, it can be really high res. It doesn't really matter. It's just as long as the texture is cool and it works for you. And a lot of times, if you have things like text here, you can always kind of blend it out. But what's great about this is that I can now import this into my pattern stamp mode. So the way you do that is you go into the layer, you go into edit, and you go define pattern. It's going to ask you to name the pattern. You can call it like green, and let's go ahead and do another one. Define pattern, brown, and let's do another one right here. Define pattern, and we'll call this one blue. Okay, so we have three different distinct patterns that we've kind of imported here. And I'm going to go to my pattern stamp here, and you'll notice that there's three basically thumbnails that popped up here, and I'm literally painting with this. Now if you take it out of impressionist mode and paint, notice how I'm painting literally the pattern that I imported. This is just a lazy man's tool of importing patterns without having to drag it into your scene, but it's great to paint just to get a little bit of color and just some variety, especially when you're drawing and you're painting, as you've seen in my previous demos where we have an object here or a character of some sort and you want to import the pattern. A great way to kind of get some color, some variety, and just instant textures. So this is a great little tool that I've been utilizing in all the demos. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the rest of the demo. Thanks. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with the actual demo here. A couple of things. I actually used this classical painting as kind of a color palette to help inspire or influence my choices in color. Now I like to use this mode called Crystallize. It's under a filter here, and what it's going to do is going to simplify a lot of the color information and give me a pixelated image here. And it's nice because you can kind of pick and choose your choices of color, or your palette, or the hierarchy of color that's in the image here. Again, the way I use it is just kind of whenever I'm stuck, I like to just kind of use or refer back to that. Or if there's anything that I feel like is lacking in my palette, then I'll definitely introduce some cooler tones or colors that I haven't really necessarily thought of. So this is a very, very helpful little method of working with color. So I'm actually just kind of starting off the background, and very much like kind of the way a traditional painter would go about a painting. you would start off with the wash. Let's just go ahead and save this out before we forget. And I guess a wash resembles kind of a nice tone, and you don't have to start off with the white canvas. And I know it's very subjective, but I know that you can actually give it a tone so it kind of helps, you know, ease your way into the actual painting. So I brought in my little folder here of textures. And these are all just textures that I've collected, whether it's been parts of paintings, you know, things that I've just collected online of abstract, you know, paintings and things like that. And I love working with just a texture wash because it gives you so much variety, and working very abstractly like this, especially for this particular illustration, really gives you so much to think about just with color. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of lay this in. And I'm just trying it out, you know, there's no right or wrong, but let's just go ahead and put it on like a soft light or an overlay and just kind of start tweaking with the levels here. So this is quite nice. I mean, it gives you so much range, you know, like there's so much depth in the color already, and we haven't even really started painting yet. So this is actually quite nice. I'm gonna use another little a little reference here, and a lot of times I'll bring in photos whether I'm inspired by a certain texture or a color, or even like a pattern in the back right here. I'm just gonna go ahead and bring in this one here, and I just want to kind of look at it again, not in terms of like an ideal like design per se, but just more as like a flavor, you know, a flavor of color or a flavor of tone. So that's why you'll see me kind of destroying really the information and just using it for the color information here. I'm gonna switch from my my more flat brush here, so I can just kind of simplify some of these little edges here, or this information. Let's see here. I'm just gonna maybe block it all out. And you know, at this phase, there's no right or wrong. I'm really just, I don't even know what I'm doing. You know, I'm just kind of just trying to feel out the painting, feel out kind of the general composition of what I really want to paint in here. You know, before I would actually start off with a sketch and kind of get things going, but this time I'm just gonna try to solidify a little bit of the color. So I'm going back to this little pixel here. Maybe introduce just a little bit more subtle colors on the ground. You know, you'll kind of see me bounce back and forth. And it's weird. I'm literally painting nothing, you know, to someone who's watching, and who doesn't know what I have planned for. It just looks like I'm just, you know, testing out Photoshop for the first time. Painting is quite funny. There's a objective aspect to it, and there's a very subjective aspect. The objective part is, you know, you're planning to paint something, you're planning to design something, and I guess the subjective part is, you know, a lot of times you just kind of want to feel your way through a painting. You know, basically, if you don't know what to paint and you want to be inspired, you kind of want to try different things, and that's kind of the purpose of this demo here, guys. Is that this time I want to just try to somehow be inspired by the tones and just kind of the brushes and the tools that I'm using. And it's not necessarily to say that I'm going to be illustrating, you know, a perfect idea, but more or less just kind of using the tools to kind of help inspire the idea itself. And I'm just trying to just think about the shape. You know, the shape has so much to do with the actual painting. You know, it introduces quality of the gesture. You know, there's a figurative aspect that is quite important. You know, especially when you're looking at it just as a shape. You know, you're trying to see if it feels dynamic or cool. And I like to actually work in this kind of pseudo, thumbnail silhouette way of painting, I guess. Just trying to loosely figure out kind of the gesture of my character. Whether it's like holding a sword or a stick, or like if the arm's up or down. It's an easier way to just try to envision the pose of the character. If you guys haven't really tried this way of working, give it a shot. I feel like every different approach will give you a really unique starting point. I mean, obviously, we all have ways of finishing off a painting. Some have really a lot of experience, so they definitely know how to, I guess, finish off a painting or how to problem solve a painting. But in terms of how you start a painting, I think there's something to it. You can actually start a painting a bit more ambiguously, and it might inspire just a new idea or a new workflow. Because if you're gonna draw like fairies and dolphins and stuff, you're gonna end up drawing fairies and dolphins. But if you use texture brushes with some weird setting on it, you might end up with some really interesting looking fairies and dolphins, or something. Like the actual content of what you're creating might be a little bit different from always starting your image the same exact way every time. I'm just kind of scruffing in some of the details here. And to be honest, I mean, at this phase, it's really, there's really nothing pretty about it. I mean, it's actually quite embarrassing. I would never really want to show my art director or even my artist friends like kind of a loose sketch like this. It's weird because you're kind of like, there's really nothing. You know what I mean? But to me, in my head, there's so much in this image because I'm trying to figure out what the hell this thing is. So for me, this is like a potentially a good image, but it also has a lot of problems, that I'm going to have to deal with. And that's why I love looking at kind of the way other artists start their work. It says a lot about kind of what's going through their head. So, hopefully this is somewhat insightful to you guys who's watching. This is just one of the ways I like to work. It's a bit irresponsible, I guess, if you put it. It's planning. It's like it's planning, but you're not really planning. You're just planning to kind of explore. But there's no guarantees that that it'll be a successful design or a successful sketch. What I do know is that it's gonna have a sword, and maybe it's gonna have shoes for sure, and maybe some sort of like Shredder looking samurai helmet. But even at this phase, it's kind of like, all right, cool. I got like this brown sketch. I'm gonna keep this saved for you guys. Keep one layer saved so you guys kind of know what I went through here. And then maybe just start blocking in just some tones, maybe a face or something here. And sometimes I'll just kind of color pick the background and start scribbling on top on the interior of the actual sketch here, just to see if if it helps inspire just some graphic design. Again, I'm approaching this completely different. All right, guys, this is not the typical let's do a drawing to define everything, but let's try to look at everything in terms of shapes. So I'm trying to look at it graphically, like, okay, well, if I have like a reddish kind of face here, maybe I can start defining some of the armor. Maybe it's darker plating here of some sort. And you know, when I am stuck, guys, I have a reference board like on my wall. I have an inspiration, book, a book for inspiration. Things that I'm where I'm constantly not only fixated on the screen, but things where I can kind of refer back to for just inspiration for just different ideas, colors, and things like that. I'm a huge fanboy of like Yoji Shinkawa, which is like the Metal Gear Solid stuff. I love kind of the Miyazaki palette as well, and I really like what do you call it? Ashley Wood. He does these kid like I guess like collectibles, are really cool toys, and there's a variety of them. Also looking at like period pieces, like kind of like you know Japanese culture, and or kind of more Roman culture and things like that. Everything's really interesting, and I think you get a lot of your ideas from just kind of looking at everything but just artwork. You know what I mean? It's like other things like that kind of inspire your artistry. So here I pulled up a reference image of a samurai, because first thing is, again, I felt so irresponsible just kind of starting off with the sketch, guys, and just pretending I knew where I was going with this, but I really didn't. But I know for a fact that this is going to have some sort of samurai element. So I'm definitely going to reference this image here, and even color picking. I know it's shameless, some of you guys might be like, no, that's wrong. But honestly, it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter to me for this, because, I'm not trying to prove anyone or to myself that I am, a legit painter. I'm really just trying to express my ideas. So if I can do it in a smart way, or in an efficient manner, by picking out colors using, classical painting, or picking out colors and tones from a image, I will do that, because what I really want to get out is kind of the idea that's in my head. So I'm very much kind of copying at this phase kind of the materials here, and the overall kind of tone of this, and how this can influence the costuming on my character. Using some of the brushes here. If you guys haven't tried out the Texture 04 brush with rotation, it actually doesn't have a rotation on it per se, but I'm actually using a Photoshop brush that was referred to a friend, that has built-in rotation. It's actually an art pen that was developed by Wacom, and it has the coolest feature. I mean, it is amazing. So basically you can rotate it, and it rotates the shape. It actually rotates the angle of your brush without having to put your brush mode on rotation or direction. It just kind of goes according to how you spin the actual brush. All right, so again, just kind of blocking and thinking just graphically. Notice how there's no form. It's just pure. It's kind of like how we used to paint or draw when we were kids, just color book style. I'm just blobbing in color. And again, I'm not trying to be super perfect about it. I'm just trying to get a good feel for it, And that's all that matters. It's just kind of like, let's look at it from a nice, graphic point of view. And when I say graphic, guys, it doesn't necessarily mean like, business card graphic design or logo graphic design. It just literally means shapes and color. That's all I'm referring to when I say graphic design. So it's all about kind of the proportion of shapes and colors that we see. Is this going to be triangular? Is this going to be a square? Is the pink going to be a rectangle? Like, what does it represent? And Does it look interesting enough? And these are all the things that I'm trying to pay attention to at this phase, is just the shapes, you know? Do the shapes look interesting? And can I paint? Can I paint you know, with confidence, you know, that the shapes will kind of have a nice defined edge, a nice clear you know, definition. And you'll notice that I'm always kind of going back and forth from my brushes here. And there's one thing that I learned from the great Craig Mullins, is you never want to use the same brush over and over and over again. Because what happens is that you start, you know, just kind of subconsciously making the same strokes, the same marks, and actually it starts to influence your design. Your overall design starts to become very, very same. You know, it's very monotonous, right? Because it repeats so much. So if it helps, like every once in a while, like, you know, just make sure you switch over to a different brush, you know, and change the size if you need to. Go ahead and just edit the horns out here and just try to literally match the shape of the reference. And again, just using the angle here just to get some nice control on the edging. And I'm obviously exaggerating the shapes, you know, I'm just, you know, this is my version of the samurai. Same color, same everything. It's just, you know, it's just my cool version of like what it would be like. Maybe there's a samurai with the big bazooka. It's probably a bad idea. Or is it? I'm actually going to put a bazooka, but maybe change the position here. See, this is where I've kind of cheated, you know. I said I was going to do everything in shapes, and I've literally had to draw it out. I was like, all right, how's this arm going to work? You know, should I fold out the arm here? Yeah, so this is like, it's starting to become really frustrating because the sketch didn't work, the shape didn't work, and I'm just like, maybe I have to stick with that sword, man. And I do apologize. This is one of the most frustrating, if not most boring part of the demo, is just watching me struggle, you know? I mean, I'm sure some of you guys might find it interesting and entertaining that I'm messing up so bad, but it happens to me on every single piece of artwork, whether it's a painting like this, or whether it's a design. I struggle, you know. There's never a time where I feel mentally safe, where I feel like, okay, I'm going into an image and I'm going into a painting and I know exactly where it's going to end up. I never really have that full feeling. And it's kind of shitty, I guess, you know, to always feel slightly unsure about the process. But I guess at a certain point, you have to kind of be okay that, you know, hey, this, if it doesn't work out, it's fine. Let's just do another one. And I guess, you know, for me, it's kind of like, it's always kind of this weird back and forth emotion. I'm like, do I like that sketch? Do I not? Do I stick with it? Do I keep going? How do I know that the end is going to look good? I mean, shit, I don't know, man. It's all up in the air. You know, there's so much uncertainty that, you know, is it worth spending the next 2 to 3 hours on this piece? But I guess that's kind of the whole point of really the journey of art. You keep striving to become better, and you got to go through these phases of not really hitting the mark, not really feeling good about every single piece, but you're learning something valuable, and that's really, it's really your judgment, it's really taste, it's really your choice in editing and understanding why something is better than other choices. And so as I'm doing this here, I start to feel that I'm getting a better sense of how to manage the entire image here, and I'm gonna go a little bit more graphic here, and I know that I'm going to reference this image. There's a part of me where I'm like, oh man, but John, that's cheating. This is not cool. Who just picks from a photograph and paints? It's like, well, you know what? They used to do that back in the day. They used to do that with live painting. I mean, it's more observation, but this is for me, this is just my version of observing what's there. I'm obviously color picking and being lazy about it to a degree, but I'm also trying to internalize the information here and trying to put it into my own thing, my own image, and seeing how that can influence the rest of the image. I think when I first looked at that samurai picture, I imagined kind of like, what would it look like if it was like this really cool badass samurai with an oversized sword. And I loved the lighting on there because it felt so ominous. It had such a really weird vibe to the overall character, and also just kind of the that grin, that really scary looking demon face. There's something really daunting about that, and just having it all sit in a pose with a weapon, I was just like, this is really cool. I definitely got to paint this out. Just painting in a darker value. Just imagining it might be kind of cool to add a little bit of those darker tones. Switch my brush here. I'm gonna go ahead and pick this background color. Just add some detail. Just kind of see how that looks. Kind of look like two buttons right now. Just gonna kind of knock it back a little bit here. Yeah, a little bit of a defined form here. What's nice is that when we started off this sketch, there was a lot of ambiguousness, right? It was just triangles, squares, shapes that were clearly undefined. It was just a shape. But the moment you start to add on, textures and some sort of design information, it starts to become something. Those boxes become pockets. This edge right here starts to become a defined shoulder pad of some sort that has ridges here. And it's interesting how your brain can actually fill in the blanks or fill in the spaces in between and start to understand what we see. And you only really need one or two areas to be defined. It's something that I actually picked up on Richard Schmid, who's an amazing contemporary illustrator, and he does like beautiful landscapes and portraits. If you guys don't know who Richard Schmidt is, be sure to check him out. He paints. He does a lot of beautiful paintings. He has great books out called Alla Prima. But I recently picked up on some of his tutorials, and he had some valuable information regarding how he controls his subject matter, and how it's not defined by every single little bit of exact information, but more about kind of the gesture, the moment, the story that it tells, the mood, the feeling, and he does that, and it feels so ambiguous because he's putting down so many splashes of color and so many shapes. But he starts to define things just by defining one clear area. One area that's really spelled out, and it spells everything out. So, and that's something that I found really helpful, especially when I was painting this, along with some of the other images, was being able to just kind of let go, and just kind of and not feel like obligated to define everything and overwork everything, because I think that's where your painting or your drawing becomes really not fun. When everything gets rendered out, it feels like work, man. But anyways, I don't mean to be preachy or tell you guys what and how art should be done, but it's just something of an observation that I've come across, and I thought I'd just kind of share you guys kind of my thought process on that. So I'm just scruffing in some of the backgrounds here. Maybe try to figure out a little bit of what this foot can look like. Again, there's a lot of freedom to kind of to working really loosely, because a lot of decisions are not concrete. So if something looks off or looks terribly bad, then it's really easy to just kind of start all over again, right? And I think that's what it's like. One of the things is that I personally felt like I get a little too precious with my artwork or with a drawing that I start. You know, whether I make a line or a stroke, and you know, if I'm too committed too early, then I feel kind of the need to keep it. You know, it's like my my conservative mentality. Like, I don't want to throw it away. And I think that can be a little bit limiting, in the sense that, you know, you're not allowing yourself to kind of explore and see what other options you have. So this was actually quite a liberating experience for me personally, because regardless of the technique or anything like that, I felt that this particular method of working and sketching just allowed me to kind of just put something down, you know, and just kind of look at it just, again, in terms of design and graphics. So even trying out the white here, I'm able to just immediately see, like, oh, that looks interesting. And thinking to myself, like, yeah, you know what, I will definitely keep, you know, the lower garment a little bit lighter, you know, keep it a lighter graphic. So as you guys can see, I'm actually working with the A Texture 10. It's a fairly simple brush that has a lot of tooth actually to it. It kind of emulates kind of the bristles of like an oil painting brush, but I definitely like it for kind of its range of textures, and also the thick to thin that I'm getting here. And also I'll kind of alternate from A Texture 04 to A Texture 08. So, you know, I mean, in the end, you know, you'll hear a lot of people say, you know, brushes or your tools don't really matter. But sometimes I feel that, you know, maybe a certain brush can give me a little bit more control with a certain look or a certain edge or a certain detail. So depending on kind of what I'm going for, it will change. The brushes will change. And, you know, always try to experiment, guys. I mean, I think one of the things that I found kind of switching brushes around is that some brushes just have kind of the, you know, finesse and fidelity that you normally wouldn't get using like a simple round brush, or vice versa, you know, like, and a lot of times that kind of helps influence your decision making. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually using a little bit more of a broader brush here that has a fairly controlled opacity, and I'm just trying to block in my ambient occlusion, basically kind of the really soft shadows of my shapes here. So I'm not blocking in any hard cast shadows. It's just like all the subtle, you know, lighting transitions and the gradations that actually happen here. So that's definitely kind of what I'm thinking here, like really subtle overlaps and things like that. And this brush has such a nice you know, tooth to it, that it gives you kind of that nice painterly, you know, really gestural kind of feel. Let's go ahead and switch over to the Texture 08. Again, just something with a little bit more defined bristles here. And I sound like I sound like as if like I paint traditionally, but I really don't, guys. I mean, you know, my traditional background is you know, predominantly drawing with markers and pens. Because of my training, I'm actually formally trained as a product designer. So a lot of my foundation is actually coming from, you know, doing drawing as opposed to painting traditionally. So if I get something wrong, I do apologize, guys. I mean, I know some of you guys watching this have huge amounts of traditional painting, and I guess all the terms that I'm throwing out are my layman kind of understanding of what painting is, or paint terms. So if I get something wrong, I do apologize. I don't mean to you know, guide you guys into the dark or something like that. It's fun. It's fun to just kind of draw too. I mean, I always thought for the longest time like painting was all about, you know, just perfect renderings and only thinking about just pure shapes. But there's a lot of it that actually, you know, it sits on strong drawing. And that's, I guess as I draw or paint more and more, I'm starting to realize that more and more is that, you know, when something needs to be resolved, you know, a lot of times it's just really my drawing that needs to be resolved, or my design, and a lot of times I'm kind of like, oh, I can just draw it in, you know, just use a brush and just make it smaller and just draw it in, try to figure out my problems and issues and just try to block it out, you know. Get in some of the darker forms here. And guys, you know, feel free to take a break. I know sitting and watching someone paint for 2 hours straight can be really exhausting. And quite frankly, it can be very boring. So, you know, I don't blame you guys. You know, take a break, fast forward if you have to. You know, I do that too, you know, just to kind of get to the point. But you know, hopefully, you know, my verbiage is insightful to some degree. So a lot of times I'm just kind of sitting here, like, as I'm painting and drawing, I'm like, what do I say next? You know? But yeah, I'm just kind of like continually adding in now design details here. You know, referring back to my photo image here, and just thinking constantly about, like, you know, the subtle shapes and indications of, like, you know, what's happening on the photograph, and how do I translate that into my own painting here. What do I adjust? What do I need to emphasize more, and what should I emphasize less on? It's always really nice to kind of go back and forth on that. And just even to color pick, you know. I remember watching a video done by Sid Mead, and it was probably one of the most insightful things I've ever seen when it comes to, you know, how he paints, how he goes about painting. If you guys haven't checked it out, be sure to check out Sid Mead's tutorials. It's provided by Gnomon. He has great examples of how he kind of does his layout paintings and his thought process, but it's quite nice in the sense that, like, you know, it's not as I guess it's not as loosey-goosey or abstract as we perceive it to be on the painting side, because, you know, he's such a calculated designer and artist, that even his colors are fairly calculated, meaning that he actually pre-mixes, or he sets up a lot of his palette, you know, so everything's kind of already set up, you know, for him. And he does that, you know, he figures out exactly what his tone's going to be, and it was actually such a liberating demo to see, because I think as I was painting this samurai soldier, you know, I think the first thing that came to mind was, like, you know, what if I took an existing palette and I just kind of use that as my base, and I'm just really just drawing with it, you know. I'm drawing with the colors that I've established. So what you guys see me doing here, not to get too sidetracked, but is I'm actually just kind of laying in the start of like kind of the bazooka. I know what I sketched in before was kind of the an indication of like a samurai sword, but I think a bazooka is totally cool. Just gonna go ahead and just kind of lasso tool this in here, just to get a clean straight edge. Get some of the back end of that bazooka, the nozzle. Just go ahead and just fill this in here. Simple graphic shape. Add a little bit of gradation here, just to give it some variation of different, you know, fill light, reflected light, form change. You know, I'm just really treating this like a cylinder. Really simple. But anyways, going back to kind of what I was saying about the great Syd Mead, was that he basically set up his entire palette. And I found that so interesting because, I mean, the guy didn't have to think about, oh, what kind of specific brown or red or green is supposed to go here. He knew exactly where he was going at all times, which allowed him to really focus in on the layout and the design of what he was creating, and it made it that much more interesting. It made it that much more powerful of an image because he wasn't having to juggle all these things at once. He was just mainly focusing on what mattered, which was the design at the end of the day. So just some food for thought, guys. You know, if you guys ever feel like you struggle with design, next time try painting. Try painting purely using only you know, predetermined colors or a predetermined palette. It might give you a little bit of an edge or a better starting point, so that you can just purely focus on the design and not have to focus on like, oh well, what should the pant color be, or what should the armor colors be. You know, if you know that the shirt's going to be red, paint it red. But the question is, what kind of shirt is it? Or is it a jacket? Or is it some sort of armor that's red? So at least you know that you know, you have the ability to kind of figure out how to make it aesthetically pleasing if you have the colors all blocked in. Anyways, I'm totally rambling on here, and I apologize, guys, for like the 20th time. But you know, feel free to email me any questions in regards to what you guys have seen so far. I know it's hard to you know, ask me because you'd have to write it down and take the time to email me. But if there's anything specific that you guys see and that you wanna kind of email me personally and ask me like, oh, how did you do that? Just go ahead and ask me right away at any time, and I'll try my best to get back to you guys. So now I feel like at this point it's pretty cool. You know, we have a fairly nice you know, defined shape here. A lot of the design decisions I feel like I'm fairly happy with as a general base. And now we have to just kind of go in there and start defining some of the details. Just kind of figure out some of the edges here. Basically, like, edging meaning like, you know, figure out some of the definition, the defining kind of forms here. You know, get in some of the hands. Some of the other like little details here on like the bazooka, stuff like that. Let's see, let's go ahead and add a little a little piece up here. Add in some details down here, you know. Maybe scruff out a little bit of highlight. And you'll see that, you know, I'm not zooming in or zooming out too much. You know, if I'm zooming out, it's better, you know, because I get to see the entire thing. But what you guys are seeing right now, I'm literally painting one-to-one. And the reason being is that it helps me to just kind of keep focused on the actual image itself and not get too, you know, to overwork the image. And I went ahead and I just kind of scaled it up because I realized, you know, the pixel was pretty low. It was 2000. I mean, it's okay for a sketch, but I definitely want to get a little bit more fidelity in like kind of the brush strokes. So I'm just I sized it up a little bit. I'm just gonna go ahead and continue working on some of these areas. It's so relaxing to just do these pieces of artwork too, because you're just purely focused on, you know, how to make the pants look graphically cool, and how to make the design overall look cool. And obviously it's a pretty simple looking character. I mean, it's a very cartoony looking samurai looking character, but it's, even at this phase of illustrating something, you know, there's still a lot of problems that you can actually solve, and it makes for a really fun and a personal assignment, you know. Even for me, you know, I'm just kind of thinking like, oh, you know, it might be cool to add some straps here, or might be cool to design some of the folds to make it, you know, aesthetically pleasing, you know. Let's add a cargo pants here. Center this thing. Let it fill up the page a little bit more here. I'm going to start playing with some of these patterns here. And I guess what I'm trying to look for is just maybe some sort of background. I really have no clear direction with the background per se. I kind of liked the idea of doing something ambiguous, but I'm going to go ahead and just try to play with this background a little bit. And, you know, it's all fair game. You know, if we don't like it, then we don't have to go with it. But if we do like it, then we can see how much further we can develop this idea. Kind of play with the saturation here a little bit. And when I'm doing this, I'm thinking like, you know, what colors would go well with yellow? You know, maybe a blue, or maybe like something dark and graphic like this. And the reason why I picked this like flower like pattern is that it has such a nice kind of like very oriental traditional like Japanese flair that I like, you know, as a background. I still want to keep it fairly abstract in the sense that, like, you know, the background is simple enough so that, you know, it's all about the readability of the character. Because if you look at the character, it's you know, it has all these like angled shapes and everything. So definitely want to keep it relatively simple. Just filter through some of our galleries here. See what we can do to kind of simplify. Again, I'm thinking of like ways of using Photoshop, you know, any digital like filter or anything like that to kind of help kind of, you know, simplify parts of the image. You know, obviously I'm gonna go on top and, you know, paint on top of it, but you know, like already there you can kind of already see a nice little combination. Give it a slight yellow tone.
Alright, let's just go ahead and adjust some levels here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and break up the texture a little bit. Add some. I'm using the pattern stamp tool here, adding a little bit of additional textures. Let's go ahead and color pick from our little palette, and I'm going to bring this down all the way to the bottom. Gonna lighten up the bottom here. I know the contrast, the value contrast is very similar to the feet, so you know, in some instances it's okay to have very similar values so that your eye can actually have some sort of resting area, and that's kind of what we refer to as a lost edge. A lost edge can be referred to something that has a similar value or tone, a similar color, or if the edges, if the line of what you're drawing is just feathered out, and it basically creates kind of like a kind of an out of focus or something soft, so that your eye can just kind of blend in and out. Another thing is try to always vary up your brush sizes, because that's what's going to give your painting or your image a lot of range, by having small against large brush strokes. I'm just kind of looking at the overall image again. Create like a little shadow here where our character is sitting. It just kind of grounds the character a little bit more. And just start like kind of darkening the edge right here, right where it hits the I guess what I would consider the back ceiling or the back wall. It's funny. I think the more I realized when I put that texture on the back, it looked like a really cheesy like 1980s like Oriental wallpaper that you would see or something at restaurants. So I think at this point I decided that, you know, I wanted to actually just draw my own texture and do something very similar, I guess, but it was just so strangely distracting. So anytime you guys feel like you want to add in a texture, and if the texture itself is too overpowering, which I felt, go ahead and just draw your own. And it doesn't have to be as detailed as your character, because you don't want it to compete. But I think if you want some intricate, kind of scumbled details in the back, it's almost better to do it by hand. So this is kind of where I'm going with this piece here. I'm just making some of those gestures, some of those details by hand here. Drawing some pretty little flower details. And the main reason why I'm using white is because I want it to contrast our character and also the bazooka that the character is holding. And it's something that it's desaturated, so the color isn't so distracting. The only thing that's catching our eye is really the value. So that's partially the reason why I'm just using white. And the areas where there's negative shapes between the body, this is where I can just paint it completely white, I don't have to worry about, trying to get a perfect design behind the character. And we're just going to rotate and reuse the same pattern here. And just kind of see how it flows, See how the patterns look behind the fingers, in the pockets right next to into the jeans or the pants, and just kind of simplify areas. And that's the biggest thing. I mean, you guys will see that, I'm actually just simplifying and emphasizing some areas more than others. And that's kind of what the difference between these two backgrounds are. I'll go ahead and darken up this top section here, just to kind of give a little bit of variation on the wall pattern here. Maybe paint a little bit of the this little detail that's kind of on the bottom. We'll go ahead and paint that. And I'm just testing out, maybe the little flower details, or the maybe it's a little bit of like a turquoise or green, just to complement the red. Maybe some detail on the top here as well. Just gonna lighten up the ground here. So, you know, like everything that I'm doing is just like constantly trying out, you know, like maybe the ground can be on overlay, or maybe the ground can be on soft light, or light in the ground. And, you know, it's constantly this back and forth, you know, decision making. And that's one thing that, you know, as I've done paintings, and as I'm even, you know, showing you guys my process, is that it's okay to be indecisive, while you're in the mode of, you know, painting, while you're in the process of trying to finish your image here, because there's so many things that we have to consider, that there's a lot of little in between steps, that can be really frustrating or can catch us off guard. And it's just all part of the process, you know? And I know a lot of times it can be really discouraging, just because it feels like your image or your painting goes nowhere. But I mean, the decisions and the things that we're learning, even if it's like making the ground lighter or darker, you know, are all core decisions, that will help you, you know, for your next image. You know, and just even understanding how to break up or simplify certain areas and redo certain areas, kind of allow you and give you a better understanding of like, okay, this is the reason why this image doesn't look good right now. You know, maybe let's try something else out, and you basically learn from it. I'm sure a lot of stuff that I'm saying is probably repeat for many of you, um, but it's one of those things that even as a professional, I find myself struggling a lot of times, whether it's personal work or professional work, and I have to just constantly remind myself like, all right, listen, it's still in the process of being developed, and I have to give myself the wiggle room or the flexibility to still make mistakes, because I haven't done, you know, every single image. You know, some images I have familiarity with it, and other images I don't. You know, it's just the way it is. And I personally have never really done, an image like this where I'm spending, you know, 20-30 minutes just on the background, you know, and just trying to balance out all the elements here. I mean, it was like it was like one of those things where in my mind I was like, I do not know why I'm even trying to attempt this, but I know that just from a design perspective that it needs something in the background, you know. So I'm adding in a little texture here because I feel like the background, it's nice, but it can use just a little bit more. I kind of want that like painterly, you know, kind of stucco kind of wall texture. So this is where I'm using this texture to put behind our character. It's just a great way to kind of put some light hierarchy up onto the top, rather than keeping it, you know, keeping your eye down below. Because again, you know, the very common way of lighting a character is, you know, keep the area of highest contrast where you want the viewer to look first, right? And this is a very blatant read. It's like, look at the head. That's why there's like a lot of that white right behind the head there. And also, I just kind of like the, you know, the oil painted textures. You know, it gives such a nice like painted quality. You know, what happens when I dial it down, or, you know. So these are some things. These are some decisions that, you know, I constantly try to weigh back and forth. If you guys haven't already, you know, like I would highly recommend start collecting, you know, different types of references. You know, I have an entire folder just for abstract textures, just because it's really nice to have, you know, just textures that we can use for color inspiration, or for just literally as textures. You know, and textures can come from paintings, your own painting, other traditional pieces. You know, just make sure you don't, it's not blatantly obvious. You know, you want to basically cover as much, or use only a section of it, and you want to use it very abstractly. All right. Let's go ahead and go back to our little reference here. And notice now I'm at the point where I'm zooming in. I'm zooming in because now I'm really focusing in on just some of the smaller shapes or smaller details. And this is where, you know, I'm actually thinking about, like, okay, what are some of the subtle edges? And again, this is the little texture section that I showed you guys in the beginning of the video. And I love referring to this little pattern stamp tool because it gives you so much variety of color, and I can just go back and forth from, you know, color picking to, you know, using the pattern stamp tool to and it gives you so much variety, you know. Just kind of adding a little bit of detail in the mask area, and also up onto the crown here. Just kind of refining some of the edges and seeing what I can do to kind of vary up the information here. Getting some of that, like, you know, reflective fill light, or that blue there. It's crazy how, like, our brain understands that it's reflecting some sort of skylight just by the color, you know, or the temperature. Notice how even at this phase, I'm just indicating, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to fully spell out all the exact details. I'm trying to be really quick about it, even at this phase. One of my good friends, he told me that, you know, even when you're painting at a micro or a close-up scale, in order for you to have a very painterly look, you're basically doing a series of mini speed paintings, even close up. So I found that really interesting and actually quite valuable, because I never really thought of painting that way. You know, you're always thinking painting is is kind of more of a series, or I guess like a rendering process of just basically polishing and detailing everything. But it's really not. It's kind of like, you know, you're orchestrating, you know, this entire piece, right? But you definitely don't want to over orchestrate or overextend one area too much. And I keep going back to that saying, like, you know, every single part of your painting has to look and feel like a speed painting. You know, even if it's something that's detailed, you don't want to suddenly just slow down and noodle out everything. You know, like draw every single button and stitch. But if you are going to indicate it like the way you would indicate or draw or paint in a speed fashion. And that's what's going to kind of keep your painting very, very fresh, very gestural, and very, very alive. And it's just something that I found that it was useful for me. I don't know if I'm quite achieving it on my end, you know? But I'm definitely, you know, always found that very useful. You know, it's just anytime I feel like I'm overworking something, you know, let's slow down, let's think about it, but let's make the marks as if I'm making a mark on a speed painting. Let's draw on that mouthpiece here. It's crazy, like how I guess like Japanese you know, samurai mask had all these like really intimidating looking ornament details on their mask. I mean, it was, I think it was for like an intimidation reason, but they all kind of look freaky, you know? They're like very weird looking demon-esque looking faces. But I guess that's kind of how it worked back then, you know? It's very much based on, like, you know, if you can intimidate your opponents, you have a better chance of winning the war or the battle. And again, just keeping in mind the concept of, like, okay, I'm working on the face here, but how do I keep it, like, loose? How do I keep it gestural? How do I keep it fast and swift? And you'll see me redo some of the lines in some of the areas because, you know, even though if you're drawing really fast and it feels slightly inaccurate, then, you know, I'm going to try redrawing that area again. And notice how, like, I'm leaving that large vest like pocket on the right as is. You know, I don't want to overwork it. I just want to keep it as that area. Just gonna go ahead and zoom out here. And I'm gonna turn on the levels here. I'm going to start thinking about just some of my darker shapes, my darker values here. And I'll show you in one second what I mean by that. Just gonna put it on multiply. Just kind of see what kind of nice value and saturation I'm getting. I'm gonna go ahead and put this behind. Actually, I'm just gonna go ahead and redo that. I basically kind of want to set the tone for our lighting scheme here. And this is something that, you know, I personally like to work the lighting before, or work the lighting, you know, before I get too into the rendering or finishing things up. So this is where I'm actually working on top of everything. Sorry, I didn't mean before the painting, but basically, you know, where I'm at this phase where everything's kind of ambiently lit. And this is where I'm going to start kind of applying some of the moodier lighting scenarios here. I love working this way because it allows for so much, just so much, you know, freedom, like just graphically. You know, I feel like you can actually get quite a bit of mood without having to worry about messing up your rendering per se. I'm just using some soft light here to kind of saturate some of these zones. Going to start painting and indicating a part of the feet in here. I kind of want like that front lit scenario, so definitely going to give it a little bit more visual emphasis on the shadow here. And again, when you guys are doing shadows too, like keep in mind the proximity of what you're casting. So if the arm is close to the wall or close to where the shadow should be casting, it's going to have a more of a defined shape. If it's further away, then it's definitely going to have more of a softer edge, a softer shape. But this is where I'm constantly I'm just going to be projecting the shadow of the character here. Kind of lighten it up or soften the edges here. Go ahead and just kind of refine the shape here just a little bit. And you want to keep in mind just your general overlaps, because again, if I echo the shape of that helmet, it's gonna look really confusing. All right, so this was definitely a challenge for me, because it's kind of like, damn, you know, it's being front lit and the shadow's like really close to the dude, you know, to the guy. So I really need to do this right. We'll have like one of the basically the crowns being casted here, and maybe another one overlapping on the other side right next to it.
And you'll see, like, you know, the shadow shape. I'm actually using much more of a softer edge for that. But you know, you'll notice that the shadow color is actually a lot warmer. The reason for that is that I kind of wanted that warm light to kind of reflect what the temperature would be. Typically, you know, our minds think like, oh well, if the shadow's typically going to get light source from a cooler you know, source, whether it's the sky or something outside of the main light source, you would think, okay, that's kind of the way it's being affected. You know, that's kind of the way the color is being affected. But in this instance, since our character is relatively neutral and a little bit warm, I definitely wanted the shadow to kind of represent something that was counter to that. You know, so something that's definitely a bit more warmer, so it adds a little bit more contrast, just in terms of color and temperature. I'm adding a little bit of a lighter source down here. You know, just basically saying like, oh, you know, everything else here is in shadow, but maybe our guy is getting a little bit of light on his pants. Brighten up maybe part of the arm here. But I kind of like how it's graphically, you know, it simplifies things, you know. It's creating, again, it's reinforcing that hierarchy of read. Because there's lower contrast where the hands are, right? And where the feet are, you know, like the first thing your eye goes to is definitely the helmet. And a lot of times you just have to kind of play with the lighting scheme a little bit to see, you know, how your brain reacts to the image. Because again, painting is all about lighting. It's all about kind of how you create a sense of you know, just readability, like how we see the image. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of define some of these edges here, and just really create a strong, you know, cast shadow on his own helmet, or its helmet. And this is where, you know, a lot of the cast shadows help reinforce the light direction. You know, now we know that the light source is definitely coming more from the right side because the shadows are being casted to the left side of the body. And you cast shadow like on the arm here, maybe on like the pockets right here. There's an artist by the name of Marcus Mateo. If you guys haven't checked it out, he published a book with Design Studio Press called Framed Ink, and it's probably one of the most handiest book I've seen or read through, just on composition and lighting, and just he has such a beautiful graphic style. I highly recommend checking out that book. It's called Framed Ink. by Marcus Mateo. You can check it out at Design Studio Press, but it's really, really good, guys. There's a lot of great stuff in there, just in regarding like composition, storytelling, and and the use of light, and how you can tell story through the use of light. All right, so we're getting close to about an hour and 30 minutes in, and this is all live. It's all real time, so there's no time lapse or speed ups here. We have about 30 more minutes until the demo's done, and this is where the last 10% starts to happen, and you'll hear me say that often in other demos, or you'll hear other artists say that it's kind of like the icing on top of the cake, right? It's the finishing touches. Once you get your base foundation down, now it's really time to go in here and start to refine a lot of the elements here on the painting. So you'll see me making a lot of micro decisions, like softening the edge, adding little tiny elements of detail here. And I'm actually working in on a little bit on the shadow edge there. And just kind of refining a little bit of the bazooka, some of the edges here. And it's honestly probably the most unimpressive part of the painting, because there's not much going on. It's just little tiny areas, little tiny things here happening. We'll do a copy merge. And this is where I like to kind of directly actually paint on top of everything. And I'm using the smudge tool. If you guys saw how I feathered that edge there. And the reason why I like to personally kind of flatten everything is it strangely forces me to kind of commit to what we have established, rather than having to layer manage and just treat it literally as a painting, as if like we committed to what's on the canvas, and I'm gonna literally draw on top of everything. I mean, I still have all the layers underneath, so I can make clean selections around our character, but I definitely don't want to, have to adjust, the shadow, or the, move the character here and there. Only if it's completely bad and off, then I will do that. But at this phase of a painting, I'm just gonna directly paint on top, and just to kind of reinforce again that light source here, that focal reed. Just gonna go ahead and just add a little bit more contrast here. Vary up the brush strokes. Just kind of see, like, I mean, you guys can see, like, I have the biggest tool preset selections. Some brushes I'll use for textures, others I'll use for, just getting a little bit more variety. Adding more light right there. And zoom out just so you can see the entire image and see how it affects our overall image here. That's kind of what's nice about like zooming out, or if you guys have the navigator on Photoshop open, it's a great way to utilize kind of how your image reads as a thumbnail. Lighten up this part of the horns or the crown of the cast shadow. And you'll notice that I'm actually lightening the values here because I don't want the contrast to be the same as what's physically being represented. And I'm actually going to feather this out a little bit more so that it kind of blends out into the background. So we can distinctly tell the difference between what is a cast shadow versus what's actually the physical part, you know, just through value. Okay, so let's get back to kind of defining a little bit more of the helmet here. I'm just color picking within my own image, and if I have to get a little bit more information, I'm gonna get some color from my pattern stamp tool, get a little bit more variety. And those little holes there. Maybe a little bit of detail on the circular piece. Again, I'm constantly just trying to make sure that, you know, it's loose enough, because I don't want to overstate it, you know. So you'll kind of see me, you know, I'm actually just taking out that information, because it can easily be overstated, and that's it can kill your entire image or part of your image, you know, if you over accentuate something, because it just feels so overworked. You know, a lot of times, like, I think like a painting represents, you know, it represents the message or a story. And a really good message and story has, you know, a time and place for, you know, how that information is conveyed, and also in which manner. A lot of times, you know, really good stories or really good messages only need to say it once or twice, right? But, you know, really poor written stories or poor messages are constantly, they're just literally just, you know, shoving that down your throat. Or like a really bad movie, you know, basically tells you what's going to happen right when it starts, right? There's no build up, there's no real climax or you know, kind of a like structure to the entire storytelling part. So it totally kills kind of the overall the overall experience, because you're kind of like, meh, I totally saw that happening from a mile away, you know. And that's kind of how I feel, I guess, about overly rendered paintings, is that it's kind of like, oh, I already know what's going on there. There's no need for me to investigate any further, because, you know, I can see it from this distance, you know. But I think paintings that have, you know, perceived, like, detailed information, if you really look up close on the ones that are really good, they have a series of mini speed paintings. Basically, it's a painting within a painting, and that's where it gets very impressive. And you'll see that with a lot of classical artists, or master artists like Sargent, or or a lot of Russian artists. You know, I don't know any at the top of my head right now, but they just have so much intricate work, and it's done with just a right amount of finesse. Just kind of roll off a little bit of that back, the little scoop right there. I'm gonna add in these huge bolts. Basically call them like the Ashley Wood bolts here. It's like this toy that I love. Again, guys, I mean this type of exercise for me is more about the illustration process as opposed to the design process, because the designs are, I mean, it's kind of cobbled from multiple elements, right? You got a samurai head, majority of the body, sections of it's from an Ashley Wood toy that I have right in front of me. You know, you got the bazooka, which is from another Ashley Wood toy. So this is just something that I just wanted as a personal exercise. But the goal here is really to kind of convey a sense of lighting and story, regardless of our subject matter. Regardless whether it's a character that's in armor, or a female lady that's in a dress, or a guy that's in a suit. It's all about how do I convey something that's provocative just with the lighting. And I'm keeping the most amount of attention to detail, as you'll see, closer to the focal point, which is like around the head. Start indicating and drawing the slabs of armor here. It's like totally just one-sided, these huge one-sided like shield slabs, but it looks awesome. Maybe brighten up this section of the helmet here. Add a little bit more of a clear contact shadow. Just pull back and just kind of see how it looks graphically. And add just a little bit of color here. Bump the saturation just a little bit. Get into some like nice little cooler tones. Anytime you guys are dealing with something that's predominantly warm, try to balance it out with something that's the counter of that color, or the opposite, which would be a cooler tone. It just gives your painting a lot more variety and breathing room. And again, for me personally, it gives me quite a bit of that like pseudo, you know, oil painterly kind of feel that I'm trying to go for. And keyword is try. You know, I can't necessarily say that I nailed the look of it, but I'm definitely trying to strive for that. So this has been definitely huge a learning process for me. And then here on the backside, because again, like the values of the shoulder were so similar to the shadow, so it was hard to read our character. So I'm actually darkening this down, just so like we know that okay, the guy's left shoulder, or the left side is going to be darker and more graphic, and it's in shadow, obviously. So that way we can say yes, that's in shadow, and we can distinguish the difference between the parts of his body that's in shadow versus the shadow that's being casted. Again, adding some indication of like maybe some stitch lines here. Some more neutral tones on the actual clothing here. These buttons are a little bright, so I'm actually going to knock down the value a little bit. Kind of readjust the hand here. Definitely want want the bazooka to have a cast shadow as well from the body. These little pouches, you know, just indicate some more cut lines and folds. I'll add a little bit more variety. of color there. Whenever something's too flat, it's either because the lighting is flat or the actual color, your color tone or your local color is set, but there's no like variation of that color. Because again, we have to remember that it's getting a lot of bounce light from the wall, you know, fill light from the sky, you know, direct light from the warm light. So there's a lot of variety of color that we can actually get. Add in a little bit of that nice little highlight right here on the mask. Get that edge going. Just some of those highlights really help. All right. I'm just gonna add just a little bit of maybe bounce light here, or just kind of define some of the shape, because it got a little muddy when I started putting it into the into shadow. And maybe just a little bit of bounce light on the actual on the other side of the armor, but not too much. You know, I just want just a little bit here, and you can see that it's actually creating a nice little lost edge. You know what I mean? Might be a little too much here. Just kind of take a little bit away from here. And that's kind of like the challenge of this painting, is that, you know, you have areas that are really defined, right? You have areas up by the bazooka that has such a strong silhouette, and you have areas where by the feet, you know, it gets lost by the shadows, you know, and also by the cast shadow in the armor, it starts to kind of blend in. And this is kind of the lost and found edges that I was talking about earlier. You know, you kind of want to create these little pockets of breathing room, or areas for your eye to kind of, you know, escape. Just kind of reinforcing that cash out on the bazooka there. And there's something I got to do with the garment here. It's still looking very simple to me. Let's see here. Let's just try to resolve a little bit more of the shadow here, and just kind of let it feather out. And I'm gonna add just a little bit more scumbling on the top here. But again, as I'm doing all this stuff, I'm thinking about like what else I can add to the figure itself. Maybe some sort of additional detail at the end on the actual fabric. Maybe adding a little bit of texture, if it helps. I'm going to go ahead and see what this does for us. I'm going to add it right here on the back side of the wall. Now, when I'm doing this stuff, again, I'm seeing what kind of variations or color I can get, or even maybe subtle bits of texture. Just something to kind of break it up. You know? I'm going to duplicate on the other side. This is kind of cool, having it up here. Dial it down just a little bit. Maybe put on this side. And Oh, this is kind of cool. Like I think maybe getting some sort of that spackled look might be neat. This is what I'm talking about, guys. Go ahead and collect those textures. There's a lot of cool stuff you can create. But you know, don't overdo it. You know, you want to just kind of sample it in just a little bit, you know what I mean? And then take it away. Let's go ahead and erase it on the bazooka here. Being a little sloppy joes. I always forget, like I've done paintings where I would add a texture and it would overlap onto a really important part of an image, and I totally forget, you know. This is from another texture. It's actually a part of a painting, a classical painting, and I really love the dried the dried white specular highlights on there, and it creates so much nice noise. I'm gonna try to see if I can import that into our image here. Just duplicate on top, maybe flip it vertically. Do the same up here. Combine the two, and then we're gonna put it on screen. Typically, I like to put textures on screen or lighten. It kind of gives you a nice in between. You know, it's not too bright, it's not too dark, and it picks up in just the right areas. It kind of gives you this nice little scattered noise, you know, so it doesn't look too flat. And I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of create a little mask here, so I can just paint in areas that I just want it to affect. So it's gonna be in, you know, the highlights here, definitely in the shadows too. It's kind of a nice texture to have, you know, for it to overlap. Let's go ahead and use a little bit of a lighter brush here. And just that little white highlight, it's actually kind of cool, you know? It looks like some sort of mistake that a painter made. Like, you know, maybe too much stucco or too much, you know, paint on that side or something. I don't know. And there we go, guys. I mean, we're getting really close to the end of the demo here. Again, just some last minute details that I mentioned before. I really want. I'm still feeling a little. The cloth is a bit simple, so still need to add that in. But for the most part, I feel pretty good about a lot of the details that we put in here or suggested. I'm using the smudge brush here just to kind of simplify. Also, I gotta fix his finger here. It's like his finger's way too long. Let's clean it up just a little bit. Let's go ahead and just kind of simplify that hand. Maybe just a little bit of reflected light on the actual glove, because it's getting so dark. And all you need is just a little bit of information, and it goes a long way, you know? Just some highlights, some indication of like some details on the top of the glove. And that's all you need, man. Simplify some of this area here. And here as well. Now we're finally starting to get on to softening some of the edges here. Gonna kind of fix that, the little edge right there. It's getting a little bit like aliasy. Basically, there's kind of like a weird jaggedy edge there from my selection. Maybe just a little crease here. Just kind of refining the edges here. Stamp your name. That's pretty much it. Just fix some areas here. Gonna add a little bit more light source here. I still don't know what to add, what kind of graphic to add for the what looks like the loincloth, but maybe just some sort of kind of like Japanese looking tribal, like water, like kind of the koi fish patterns or something here. Just gonna indicate it really loosely. But I know that, you know, leaving it white kind of looks a little bit weird, you know. It's you got all this other stuff and all these other details here, and leaving it just pure simple white kind of kills it. So I'm gonna add some more graphics here, more lines, just some graphic design details. And maybe we're just gonna pick a little color here and just put it a little behind those graphics. And this is I put it on darken mode so that you can actually get right behind those lines. It's a little too dark. Lighten it up. Maybe these represent like water or something. But just something graphic. It doesn't really have to be anything specific. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the demo. Again, let me know if you guys have any questions. And thank you again for watching. And I'll see you guys in the next session. Thanks.